be happy with that for now because I was enjoying it and because it was giving me an outlet. It was allowing me to like have an imaginative life at a time when it was really quite difficult for all of us to have this imaginative life. Hello, my name is Briohny Doyle and I'm an author. My new novel is Why We Are Here. It's published by Vintage Penguin Random House. And it's about a woman named Bibi who moves from one city in Australia, a fictionalized city in Australia, to another fictionalized city in Australia. It's to kind of like repair herself from grief. And she lives in a very surreal, very glamorous apartment by the sea with her dog, Baby. And she spends a lot of time reading and thinking and walking around and trying to work out how the rest of her life is going to be, which probably sounds like not much of a plot, but lots of things go on in that. And she's mistaken in the local area for a dog trainer, and she begins to have these relationships with the people in her neighborhood around training their dogs, which is kind of like unpacking lots of stuff about class and relationality and community in Australia. This is not my first novel. This is my fourth book, but my third novel. So my first novel was The Island Will Sink, which came out with Brow Books in 2016. I then wrote a non-fiction book about generationalism and adulthood and what maturity means for different generations. That's called Adult Fantasy, and that came out with Scribe. And then in 2021, my second novel, Echolalia, was published with Vintage, which was a kind of a domestic story about a tragedy that befalls a family in a small community, and the lead up to that, and then the aftermath of that. And both of those early novels are very involved with responsibility, climate, environment, and the ways that we build our communities and senses of self, which I think this novel also does. Why We're Here was written in a completely different way to my previous two novels, Echolalia and The Island Will Sink, insofar as I was writing it during the lockdowns. It's a work of autofiction, and some of the elements of the book that occur to Bibi had occurred in my own life. So I was recovering from grief, and I was living alone for the very first time in this really amazing apartment that is the base, that's the setting of the novel. And I was supposed to write a very, very plotty second novel for the Penguin contract, but I just found that I couldn't. It was too big a plot. My life felt very narrow and focused, and I just wanted to open up my practice and do something in a different way. So with Echolalia and The Island Will Sink, they're pretty plotty books, and I did a lot of work in structure, like planning them structurally, heaps of character studies, knowing where I was going all the time, coming back in and out, doing work outside the text. Whereas with this one, I literally just allowed myself to imagine anything based on anything that was happening around me, wrote it down on little bits of paper, scraps of paper, and then came back and transcribed it into this big unwieldy document, not knowing what would happen, not knowing what would become of it, not even knowing if it would be a book or if Penguin would want to publish it, or, and just saying to myself, that's okay. Be happy with that for now because I was enjoying it and because it was giving me an outlet. It was allowing me to like have an imaginative life at a time when it was really quite difficult for all of us to have this imaginative life. So in that way, it completely differed to my previous novels. And I do think like I have read books before where like Cusk, like Maggie Nelson, like those kind of books, and I've thought, how did they do that? I wonder how you write a book like that. And this book felt like just a leap of faith of like, I'm just going to see what happens when I don't control everything. And I just like allow myself to imagine whatever I need to imagine, bring in anything that I want to bring into the story, and just try and keep the practice light, even if the content can't always be. As I said, like with Echolalia and The Island Will Sink, I was very conscious of needing to address themes and wanting, elements of craft in the books having function thematically and in terms of what I wanted to say, which is not to say that I was just trying to create, didactic texts. I wanted them to be really alive. I wanted the characters to be really alive, but it was all very thought out as to what I was critiquing. With Why We Are Here, I didn't enter that space thinking, I want my book to say this or I want my book to say that. I was holding the ideas that I always hold quite tightly, more loosely. So I'm thinking about the relationship between human and non-human, worlds, people, creatures, beings, and that responsibility. I was also thinking about the tensions that exist in a city. Balboa Bay, the fictionalized suburb that it's set in, is really like a suburb that's partly gentrified and partly not gentrified at all. And the friction that exists in this kind of, this schism between class within a city. And then also, right in the midst of all of that rhetoric of we're all in this together, thinking about how atomized we can be and how that sense of responsibility can really be ruptured. So I was just thinking about all of those things and just allowing that thinking to come into the work as opposed to being like, how will I express this through X or Y character? And I think the other thing is the book's intertextual. I've got a device in it where the Bibi lives in an apartment where she can hear the prison intercom. There's a prison over the other side of the highway, and she can hear the prison intercom. And in the book, the prison intercom quotes various philosophers and writers and stuff like that. So I allowed some of those ideas and that to come in intertextually into the book so that I didn't have to kind of like push them in various other ways. And my intention there was that I just wanted the reader to just be able to have their own emotional response to these ideas instead of being kind of like narratively tangled in them. Bibi is an outsider, and she's at a crossroads. But the crossroads is kind of like, when you think about characters at crossroads, it's not a clear intersection. It's maybe a smeary road that doesn't have the same traffic that it used to be. So she's used to being an outsider. Bibi is a writer, and she's used to yearning for connection and for also maintaining critical distance, writing, thinking. But in this particular space, because she's just like, how am I going to live the rest of my life after all of these experiences of grief? She's really reassessing what it means to connect and thinking through all of the ways that you can connect and that we collectively can connect after massive social and political tragedy. And, the story keeps investigating this idea of aftermath. And if it's possible to have aftermath, given that, pandemic, climate change, these things don't end. We always want to say, that happened and now it's over and we can go to a new normal or whatever. And Bibi's very much in this sense of like, but is that true? It's always crisis. And so therefore, how do we live? So she's kind of like struggling with herself, but she's also just like, she wants to get over it and move forward and like party and hang out with animals and meet her neighbors. But she's also just like anxiously moving forward into the world, as I think we all were at that time. Dogs are essential, full stop, in the world. I am a big dog person. In the novel, there are two main dogs. There's a dog named Baby, who is Bibi's dog, who is based on my dog. And anyone who's lived with a dog really closely knows how you kind of communicate with them. And in that book, I figured it as telegraphing. So they'll telegraph to each other, hungry, bored, danger, these kinds of simple things. And sometimes it gets more complex and occasionally Baby has a little more to say. And they have a really funny relationship as well. The other main dog that's in the book is the Doberman. And the Doberman is this like rescue pedigree dog that has been adopted by quite a wealthy neighbor of Bibi's. And he's having trouble fitting in. He's having trouble living in the domestic scene. They have this big kind of palatial house that backs onto the golf course, and the Doberman does not like golf, and he just like runs the fence salivating, and he's really aggressive. The neighbor mistakes Bibi for a dog trainer, and she kind of like allows that to happen in a kind of like, maybe this will be my new life sort of way. And that bit of the story is based on something that happened to me. So I met this neighbor and we were just chatting, and then suddenly he was like, "Oh, can I get your number? You're a dog trainer." And I was like, "Oh, I'm not a dog trainer." He's like, "Yeah, dog trainer," and like put my name in his phone. Nothing ever happened out of that, obviously. But that was one of the things, like when I was writing the book, I'm like, imagine if that had actually happened. And how funny is that? Because I'm a renter in this kind of gentrifying suburb, and people probably don't know how to take me and my scruffy, non-pedigree dog. This guy's just assimilated me as this particular kind of service. And so then I started thinking about what it would be to like meet all of these neighbor dogs and imagining this for this character. But yeah, so the Doberman has to kind of learn how to get along and how to continue with life. And that's really a mirror or a foil for like Bibi's own situation. She has to learn when is it time to rebel? When is it time to be more compliant? When do you reach out for affection? When is it safe for you to like sit down and relax? And when do you have to have your hackles up? And that's kind of like this journey of reciprocity between Bibi and all the dogs, because all the dogs in the book, and there are lots of them, have something to teach her. And I think that that's really true of dogs in our lives. They all have something to teach us, all of them, no matter their behaviors. I just did a lot of reading about dog training, but I don't think that Bibi trains in the way that I would necessarily train. Like, she's really obsessed with Cesar Milan. Cesar Milan's a bit of a problematic figure if you talk to dog trainers as well. But no, Bibi's just like scrolling the internet and looking for tidbits and doing her best. Her instincts are loving instincts, I think, always loving instincts. But in terms of dog training, I didn't want to professionalize her, and I definitely didn't want to make this book like a how to train your dog book, And I'm actually glad after I finished editing and the book was all set and ready to go, I read that book, Your Dog is Your Mirror. Have you even said that? And God, it was amazing. It was I just found it really profound, and I'm glad that I didn't read it beforehand, because I think that some of those ideas would have made it in there. So I'm kind of glad in a way that I didn't do too much research about those kinds of things, because it allows Bibi to stay as this kind of like weird outsider, and like she's trying things out. Her heart's in the right place. And there's a kind of a great scene where the other, really fun to write, where the other dog walkers and trainers of the area accuse her of being a scab, and are just like, get off our territory about, and who gets to look after the dogs of this affluent area. The apartment is based on my apartment that I rent still. And yeah, I got a really short-term lease on this place. They're imminently about to lock it down. They've been imminently about to lock it down since I got it. It's above an old corner store. So I assume that what happened was, and I know a little bit about it now just from talking to neighbours, but there was a couple, they ran the corner store, they ran it, their whole lives, and, they grew old and died there, like that was their whole lives. And so they've done it up like gorgeously, but they did that in the 60s. So it's glitter on the ceiling, it's chandeliers, it's all of this stuff, but then no one's done another reno. So all of these bits and pieces are just falling off it, and the rain comes in and the windows rattle, and no one wants to tend to it. But it's so obviously been really lovingly tended to before. And I think it just became so evocative for me. I get quite obsessed with places. So Echolalia was centered around this like dried up lake in the middle of a town. And that's from my hometown, Ballarat, that symbol. I just like, it was too good a symbol not to bring into the center of a book. And that's what this apartment felt like too. And then I also thought, like at a certain point when I realized, oh no, this is definitely a book, and it's going to be published, and it's going to have a life beyond, my imagination. I had my dear friend, our photographer and artist, Nash Ferguson, come around and take some photographs of the inside of the apartment. They're in the book. And I wanted to kind of do that to unsettle this like distinction between what's real and what's imagined, and to have readers ask themselves those questions, and also hopefully maybe be a little bit critical of our kind of thirst for real narratives or truths, or like, the sorts of memoirish details that we delight in, or all of that kind of stuff. And just, I wanted to make this really kind of surreal, dreamlike space out of it. And it is like, this apartment actually does feel really, because of the sloping floor and stuff, you kind of, it's quite a trippy space to be in, to be honest. I think I was trying to be funny in all my books, whether or not, I think this is the funniest book that I've written. The Island Will Sink is funny. It's bleak, but I think it's funny, and certainly it was satirical, and there was a lot of irony in those characters. Echolalia, obviously, like, you're going to write a novel about infanticide, it's not going to be a laugh a minute, but there is levity between those characters, and it's really important to me not to create worlds that are just dramatic or just terrifying or just sad all the time. I want there to be a balance of, like, people can be so funny in such dire situations. There can be such levity even at moments of deep profundity. So I hope that that's always a part of my work. That said, this particular book I was holding extremely lightly, because I wasn't making any character do something to, show something or demonstrate something. I was able to just dwell in the comedy more. And that for me was really fun. It's fun to do. And I also think, I needed it as a writer as a counterpoint to grief, but I also think that the reader probably needs it as a counterpoint to grief, because life is both grief and hilarity. Like that's just how it is. It isn't all sad or all funny at any one time. And anyone who's been through big loss knows those moments where things are so funny, even, yeah, in the midst of great sorrow. I am really interested in that, and I would like to do some proper research so that I could answer that question, because there are, the new Deborah Levi novel, that's a pandemic set novel. There are novels coming out that are pandemic set. I really loved Shirley by Ronnie Scott. That was a pandemic set novel. No one is leading with that on their blurb because the commercial perception is that we've reached saturation. But I feel a bit funny about some of that rhetoric because, well, for one, I read a really interesting book about how there didn't seem to be any representations of the Spanish flu when that was going on, but actually it was like covertly represented in a lot of the literature of that time. And if you read things through that prism, then you can kind of see representations you wouldn't have seen before. Publishing obviously now is much faster. There's many more books. And it seems natural to me that writers would want to address what's happening in the now. And it seems sad to me that people would not do so, like not address the most urgent and pressing issues of the time, because to do so is not commercial, because we are tired of our reality. So, I feel like I don't know what people are going to do. I do think that, and I think I addressed this in my book performatively, hopefully, that the pandemic did something to our relationship to time. We experienced time unhinged from all of the ways we usually structure our day. We're going to the office, or, we were completely loosed from that. And work went on, but also the social world didn't go on. So I think it seems weird to me that writers wouldn't be affected by that at the level of the actual writing, because it certainly changes, if you change the way you perceive time, it changes the way you're going to write, I think. The other thing I'll say in relation to the pandemic with my book specifically, with Why We Are Here, is that I wrote it and I wanted to finish writing it at the end of 2021, because I felt like I'm addressing something that's very happening right now, and who knows what's going to happen in another month, in another 2 months. And I don't want to be caught in a loop of having to continually address the now, and therefore have this document that never ends. Although kind of conceptually that sounds sort of fun now that I say it out loud, but I didn't want to do it with this. So I stopped writing the draft at the end of 2021, and then I put it to the side, and I came back to it at the beginning of 2022. And at that point I was like, is this going to be a book or isn't it? And that's when I was like, no, it is, and it can be contained in that space of time. So I think I didn't give myself the task of taking the implications of the pandemic well into the future. Like, how will this reshape the way that we are into the future? I kind of left that as an open question. And I think had I tasked myself with that question, and maybe I will task myself with it at some point, it would be a very different book. I'm a teacher, so I used to teach at Deakin, just around the corner from the Leaf Bookshop shop, but now I teach at the University of Sydney, and I teach creative writing. And yeah, I teach creative writing. I walk my dog. I live a pretty quiet, fun life. Yeah. So I loved Shirley, as I said, by Ronnie Scott. I really, really enjoyed that. I just started the new Deborah Levi. Is it August Blue? Is that, yeah, I just started that. I'm just finishing the Ali Smith. I just got onto summer. So you can see I'm kind of interested in reading these pandemic books and thinking about, oh, maybe I can write an essay about that or something, because it's really interesting the way that people have addressed various contexts of the pandemic. Oh, I read some trashy stuff too that probably doesn't need a plug. I enjoyed romantic comedy. I recently just read The Remains of the Day for the first time in my life, and that was great too. So I'm reading widely, and I'm excited about what's coming out now that I saw a whole bunch of stuff, but of course I can't remember right now. Yeah. That's a good question. I don't have an idea for a novel. So I'm thinking about essays, but I'm also just trying to make enough space in my life that maybe an idea for a novel will come. I find that I always want to write something really light, just really light and compulsive, but then I come to the pages and I'm interested in the state of the world. And so I bring with me those kind of explorations. So maybe it's time to write some essays and do some shorter considerations. And yeah, I'll just wait and see, what infects my brain and, decides that it's a novel for me. Thanks for having me, Katie. Thanks for having me, everybody. It's been really great.